Shalom, WJC family. Time for our weekly Torah Talk. Parshat Bo, along with the previous Parsha, Va'era, and the next one, Bashalach, raise a lot of questions about free will. You see, we have this famously in the story of the Exodus, that the first 5 plagues, we're told, Pharaoh's heart hardens, and he just changes his mind and won't let the people go. But in these last 5 plagues, 2 were in Parshat Va'era, and 3 that we'll read this Shabbat when we read Parshat Bo on Saturday morning. For the last 5, it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart. The question is, if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, hasn't God taken away his free will? How can he do better if God won't let him? There's lots and lots of discussions and commentaries on free will based on this very famous passage. Of course, famous because we quote it at the Seder table on Pesach. We would read it this time of year. And I wanted to focus in on that, because the question isn't really, I think, whether or not we have free will or if God can take away our free will. The question is whether we choose to use our free will. So let me explain in 2 parts. First, how can I say that Pharaoh has free will if God is hardening his heart? There's a wonderful commentary by Nachmanides, the Ramban, and in it he says, this is on a verse actually from last week's Parsha, 7:3 of Exodus, and he says, only the second half of the 10 plagues were brought upon Egypt due to Pharaoh's transgressions. As the Torah states, Pharaoh's heart was strengthened, or hardened, or made heavy. And Pharaoh hardened his heart. Those are the first 5 plagues. He did not want to send the Jews out of Egypt for the glory of God. Rather, when the plagues increased and he was becoming too worn out to withstand them, his heart softened and decided to send them out because of the severity of the plagues themselves, but not in order to do the will of the Creator. Right? This is the Pharaoh as a victim of torture theory. Right after the first 5 plagues, the 6th one comes along, and Pharaoh says, I can't take anymore. Right? And they say in torture, you can get anyone to say anything just to make the torture stop. But that's not good enough for God. He doesn't want Pharaoh to just do what he wants. He wants Pharaoh to truly have a change of heart, to truly recognize a power in the universe greater than Pharaoh himself. And so, for the next 5 plagues, God strengthens, right? The verb is yechazek, strengthens Pharaoh's heart. In other words, he gave him the spirit and the courage so that he would keep going until he saw truly the light. According to this interpretation of the Ramban, Pharaoh's free will would have been taken away because of the torture, because of the tremendous pressure he was under. But God strengthens his heart, gives him back his courage so he could do what he really wants, which is keep those Jews in Egypt and not listen to God. And so another plague and another plague. According to this interpretation, by God giving Pharaoh back his courage to face the plagues and do what he wants, God is in fact giving Pharaoh free will. He's saying, look, I'm going to make you feel like these previous plagues didn't happen, and then you do what you choose based on what you've learned so far. And based on what he's learned so far, Pharaoh says, I'm going to keep these Jews here, and I don't care about the consequences. And this goes on and on like that, and we see it in every plague. There's bargaining. First, Pharaoh says, you can go, but leave your women and children and your flocks here. And Moses says, no, and another plague comes. Then they come back. After the 9th plague, darkness, he says, you can go, but just leave your cattle here. And Moses says, no, we're not going to leave our cattle here. We might need them to worship. And finally, only after the 10th plague, in this week's Parsha, Pharaoh not only tells them to go, but on their way out the door, he says, and by the way, when you're out in the desert worshiping your God, share a blessing for me. That is the ultimate concession, the ultimate expression of free will. He says, I'm just a human being. And I now understand that. And I now understand that there's a force in the universe, this God that is bigger, greater than me. And I would really like a blessing from that God. So according to the Ramban, Pharaoh, in fact, is a demonstration of God giving free will back to someone who would have lost it due to fear and pain and whatnot. So fine, if he has free will, if free will isn't a question, then what can we learn from it? There's an amazing quote from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel from his book, God in Search of Man, about free will. He says, the essence of man's freedom is in his ability to surpass himself, right? To go beyond what we might expect. That's freedom. To a certain extent, man is enslaved by his environment, society, and character, right? We are victims of our circumstance. But what makes man different, man can think, will, and make decisions beyond these limitations, right? We can break out of those circumstances. It doesn't happen often, maybe, but we can go beyond, express free will, and go beyond what would normally be expected of us based on where we were born and who we are and what we were taught and the experiences that we've had. If men are treated as processes, freedom is destroyed. What he means here is if you think of a person like a computer or a black box, a process, an algorithm that you put in certain inputs and every time the same output is going to happen, then that makes us just robots, just algorithms, just processors. And Heschel's saying, no, that idea of a person, input in, black box does its thing, input out, that destroys freedom. Man is free at rare moments, says Heschel. Freedom is an event, right? So we have this ability to have free will, but we don't do it very often, he's saying, right? Usually you're going to put in these inputs and you are going to get the same output. But every once in a while, on rare events, special occasions, we are able to rise above that, change the output, because we have free will. We can be exceptional in this way. And here's the kicker that Rabbi Heschel says. Everyone has the potentiality for freedom, but only rarely achieves it. Right? This is a teaching that I learned from the Musar texts, right? The texts about spiritual development and perfection. And they say that, we all have free will, but we very rarely use it, right? If the whole world is a playing field, right, and we have choice, 90% of the time we do not use that free will. The actual free will section is like this much, 10% maybe, where we actually bother to stop and think, oh, I have a choice here. Otherwise, we're reacting by rote. We're reacting by instinct and by habit. Most of what we do every day, we don't even give a second thought to. The way we react to the people we love, the way we react to the people we see, what we decide to do, what we eat, when we sleep, all these things, very rarely do we use free will to make a choice. And Pharaoh, if we all have 10%, Pharaoh has reduced his to be non-existent. He is so trapped in his own habits, in his own ideas, in his own wickedness. It's not that he doesn't have free will. It's that he has surrendered it. So what's the lesson for us in that? Well, if this is our usual free will, if this is the part of our lives we're in control of, right, 10%, our job is to try and widen the field through study, through journaling, through meditation, through visioning difficult situations, to make it so that we can react a different way, so that we can take control of our lives and truly have free will. Unlike Pharaoh, it's not easy. As Heschel says, everyone has the potentiality for freedom, but only rarely achieves it. When will we buck our instincts, reassess our priorities, and practice such that we can have greater free will, and in such elevate our lives and our existence and make the world more beautiful, not only for others, but ultimately for us as well? I pray that we all have success in doing that soon, and wish you a Shabbat Shalom.